Welcome to part 3 of our Retro Redesign series, where we throw RetroSupply's mascot into the greatest art styles of the past. We've done Rubber Hose, we've done Hanna-Barbera, and now it's comic book time. Today we're jumping into the legendary world of 1970s superhero comics, full of bold line work, brooding heroes, and glorious halftone printing mistakes. This is the era of capes, cosmic threats, and monologues that last 3 speech bubbles. In this video, I'll quickly recap Retro Boy's core design, and then break down the hallmarks of the comic book style, and show you how I gave him the full superhero treatment, muscles, shadows, angst, and all, layer by layer. So grab your cape, let's dive in. Before we jump into the redesign, here's a quick refresher on Retro Boy. He's always been packed with retro charm. Toolbox in one hand, megaphone in the other, and a storm of creative chaos. Papers, erasers, and brushes that are flying all around him. He's built from basic shapes. Circles, rectangles, clean lines, but it's the little touches that really sell him. His props, the halftone cuff rolls, and the oversized R on his overalls. So no matter what era we send him to, those essentials come with him. The challenge is to transform the tone, anatomy, and attitude to fit the new style. So buckle up. We're headed to the dramatic, ink-splattered world of 1970s comics. The 70s was the decade where comics got serious. Gone were the campy hijinks. Now it was political subtext, complex anti-heroes, and enough shadow to blot out the sun. Everyone's shredded and everything has texture. And every other panel is someone yelling about justice while getting punched through a wall. So let's break down what makes this style so iconic. Construction. Heroic, stylized, realistic-ish anatomy. They had long limbs and strong poses. There was some slight exaggeration, like larger hands and square shoulders. Silhouettes were dynamic and avoided stiffness. Design. Expressions matter. They had furrowed brows, clenched jaws, and wide stares. Their costumes had realistic clothing folds, seams, and a bit of texture. And every part of their look added to the storytelling. Line art. Thick outlines to define the shapes, and thin internal lines for detail, especially around the face and arms. Inkers embrace shadow. Use hatching to carve out volume and mood. Coloring. Limit yourself to a classic 4-color palette, and think like a printer, less polish and more texture. Colors feel printed, not painted. They were made up of cheap ink on rough pulp. Alright guys, now let's send Retro Boy into the ink-stained gauntlet. But before we go full superhero mode, let's take a quick pause. If you're enjoying the series, give that like button a Hulk smash, and subscribe so you don't miss our next installment. Alright, let's bring on the drama, roll the time lapse. Alright, here he is, Retro Boy, all grown up. Just like before, we're going to take him apart layer by layer and see what makes this guy tick. Starting from the construction sketch all the way to the final colors. So let's turn those off now. Alright, so I kicked things off with this loose construction sketch. It's super rough, super light. I'm just kind of getting the general forms in place. And at this stage, I'm not worried about lines or details. I'm just focused on the pose and the proportions and the energy. So right away, you'll notice something different from the last styles we tackled, and that is that anatomy's back, baby. This version leans way more realistic. We're not doing those rubber hose limbs or the simplified Hanna-Barbera shapes anymore. This guy's got some structure. You can feel like his bones under the surface, the muscle definition. The weight of his stance. And now look guys, I know if you're not used to drawing realistic figures, I get it. It can be super tough. Realism is one of those things that's easy to admire but hard to pull off. And my advice is just to go back to the basics, you know, do some life drawing, do some gesture studies. When I was in art school, we had to do them like every single day, and it was brutal at first, but eventually you find your rhythm. It becomes like almost relaxing. It's like meditation in a way. Trust me, that foundation, it totally pulls off. I could not be making these comic characters without that time spent doing life studies. So let's turn off my construction sketch here and move to my rough. And the first major change is obviously I beefed this boy up. He's been hitting the gym. He's got a way bigger chest. He's got bigger arms, bigger forearms. He's got a stronger, more realistic silhouette. His jawline sharper. You know, his energy's still upbeat, don't get me wrong, but it's no longer cartoonish or goofy. He's gone from Saturday morning sidekick vibe to like a full-on comic book hero. So from there I move to my clean sketch. We'll show you that. Boom. This is where I start to refine everything, you know, lock in the anatomy, finalize the pose, start carving out some details. And yeah, with this style, details matter. This isn't like the earlier styles where we could get away with like flat shapes. Here, you know, I'm adding folds into the clothing. I'm adding structure into the shoes, shoelaces, you know. Generally, I'm thinking everything as more of a three-dimensional shape rather than a flat, static image. It's to ground the character in reality. It's still stylized, but it feels more believable. So after I did my sketching, I went in and did my inks. And this is where the whole thing starts to feel real, man. Inking is absolutely essential to this comic style. The brush I use for the stage is the dry fountain pen brush. I could not recommend this brush enough. I love this brush. It's from the standard pen pack, and I use it all the time, especially for comic book inspired work. It's got this gritty, scratchy kind of texture that looks like hand done, almost like it's already been aged or printed. And the lines aren't like too sterile or too digital. There's areas where the line like naturally just thins a bit, which I really like. It really feels like a real pen. It's got a lot of character. So for my inking itself, this era, especially like the 70s and early 80s comics, it's all about contrast, man. These thick, punchy outer lines combined with these like thinner interior lines. But here's the trick. You have to be strategic. Too many lines and the piece can start to feel cluttered, you know? So you have to kind of pick your battles, decide what's important to highlight, and let the rest fall into place. And, you know, I'm talking about these kind of arm lines here, just to show the definition, or these little textured lines to replicate the wood pattern. Like, if I went in and started doing way more, it's just gonna look way too overbearing. You gotta pick and choose your battles. A good rule of thumb is that your line work alone should tell the story, you know? Even without color, the weight and the flow of these lines should make the character feel powerful and dynamic. You should feel his strength from the line weight. If it's not doing that in black and white in ink, then the color's not gonna save it. So speaking of that, let's talk about halftones and color. After I finished my inking, I gave it these halftones to add that classic printed texture, and they were also part of Retro Boy's original design, so I kept those. Now, the coloring process is where things diverge most drastically from the previous styles. Up until now, it's been pretty standard. You know, you sketch, you refine, you ink, and then you fill in your colors. But this era of comic book art, the color process has a whole unique flavor. So I'll turn on my colors right now and you'll see what I mean. So to get that authentic retro print look, I used the ColorLab bundle, and we actually broke down this bundle in a previous video, so if you haven't seen that, definitely check it out. The short version is it's basically based on traditional CMYK comic printing. It's just 4 inks. It's just yellow, red, blue, and black, which is K. These colors kind of layer on top of each other, so if I turn off my yellow and I turn it back on, you can see that I use different intensities of halftone brushes. If the brush is more intense, then the dots will be closer together. And if you do that, then layer these colors on top of each other, it creates all these kind of secondary tones, and it's the same method that old comic book publishers use to save money on printing, but it ends looking super distinctive and satisfying. There's a nice charm to it. When you use it intentionally, you can build really rich, dynamic palettes with only a handful of tools. So yeah, if you're interested, go check out the ColorLab video. It's a really fun way to color. For my color palette, for this piece, I went slightly more realistic, but kept things vibrant and fun. The colors are grounded, but not boring. They still pop, which keeps the energy alive. And then finally, I just added some ink blotting, which is basically an effect you can get digitally that replicates when ink kind of bleeds into the page. And to do this, I just used a couple brushes from the Edge and Fold pack. You just create a new layer, set your color to black, and start doing that over. You know, maybe vary up your brush size or the actual brush you're using to give it some realism. And then you just set it to overlay. Boom, easy. And it's kind of subtle, but like if I zoom in, you'll see more. See, it adds that kind of color variation that you get when inks kind of bleed into each other. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Here's Retro Man. He's a little older, a little tougher, a lot more heroic. He feels like the same character, but just upgraded. He's ready to punch some bad guys in the face with his megaphone or something, I don't know. And that wraps up our 1970s comic book makeover. From soft and squeaky to gritty and ink-stained, Retro Boy has survived yet another trip through the time stream. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment with the next style you want to see us tackle. And if you want to recreate this vibe yourself, we've linked all the brushes I use below, straight from the RetroSupply vault. That's it for me, guys, so until next time, stay weird and happy creating.